My younger sister, Riley, and I decided to take a backpacking trip along the west coast last summer. Riley, as usual, took charge of planning the itinerary. She's always been the decisive one, and I'm happy to go along for the ride. She picked a remote spot in a coastal forest in Oregon, a place she found through some hiking forum. The trail promised solitude and stunning views, and after a long drive and a grueling 6-mile hike through dense woods, we arrived at the designated camping area. It was breathtaking, towering pines, the distant crash of waves, and not a soul in sight. The air smelled of salt and cedar, and the ground was soft with moss and pine needles. The campsite wasn't clearly marked, though. The forest opened into several small clearings, each looking like it could be the spot Riley had read about. We debated for a bit, but eventually chose a flat, grassy patch surrounded by thick trees. It felt secluded, like we'd stumbled into a hidden corner of the world. As we set up our tents, we noticed the area wasn't as pristine as we'd expected. Scattered around were odd bits of gear: a single hiking boot crusted with mud, a frayed length of rope, a bent tent stake half buried in the dirt. It was strange. This wasn't a drive-up campground where people might carelessly leave things behind. You had to hike miles to get here, so abandoning gear seemed unlikely. Riley shrugged it off, saying maybe some careless hikers had passed through. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't push it. We were here to relax, not overthink. The day passed quietly. We explored the nearby trails, ate some trail mix, and swapped stories about old family road trips. Riley teased me about my terrible sense of direction, and I reminded her of the time she got us lost on a shortcut in the mountains. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we built a small fire and settled in with our camp chairs. The forest was dark, the kind of dark that swallows everything beyond the fire's glow. We roasted marshmallows and laughed until our sides hurt, the crackling flames keeping the chill at bay. Around 10 p.m., as we were tossing more wood on the fire, I noticed something odd. Far off in the trees, barely visible through the dense undergrowth, was a faint orange flicker. I squinted, trying to make it out. "Riley, look at that," I said, pointing. She turned, her brows furrowing as she followed my gaze. After a moment, we both realized it was another campfire, maybe a quarter-mile away. It was small, just a pinprick of light, but unmistakable in the pitch-black woods. The sight was jarring. We'd assumed we were alone out here. The trail was obscure, and we hadn't seen another hiker all day. Plus, the direction of the fire didn't make sense. That part of the forest was thick with brambles and fallen logs, no place to set up a camp. Maybe they're just super private? Riley suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. I nodded, trying to brush it off. Maybe some hardcore backpackers wanted to rough it off trail. We didn't dwell on it. We cracked open a couple of sodas, munched on chips, and talked until our eyelids grew heavy. By midnight, we doused the fire and crawled into our tents. The forest was silent except for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the ocean. I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the cool air and the soft ground, that I woke up a couple of hours later, my bladder screaming. I'd chugged too much soda before bed, classic mistake. Grumbling, I unzipped my tent and stepped into the night. The air was damp, and the darkness was absolute, the kind that makes you feel like you're floating in a void. I grabbed my headlamp, but didn't turn it on, not wanting to wake Riley or attract attention. I walked about 60 feet from the campsite, far enough to avoid any wildlife sniffing around, and took care of business. As I stood there, my eyes adjusted to the dark, and I noticed that distant campfire was still burning. It hadn't died down at all, which was odd for the middle of the night. I don't know why, but I found myself staring at it, transfixed. Maybe it was the late hour or the eerie quiet, but something about that tiny flame held my attention. As I gazed into the distance, my heart skipped a beat. Between me and the fire, maybe 100 yards out, I saw something. A shape. It was vague, shrouded in shadow, but it looked like a person standing among the trees. My first thought was that it was a trick of the light, maybe a skinny tree or a bush catching the fire's glow. But the more I looked, the more certain I became. It wasn't a tree. It was tall, upright, and still a chill ran through me. I told myself to calm down. There was no way someone was out there, just standing in the dark. But then I saw another shape, and another. They were scattered through the forest, faint outlines barely distinguishable from the trees. There had to be a dozen of them, maybe more, spread out in a loose arc. My stomach twisted as I realized they all seemed to be facing me. Their forms were too dark to make out details, but the way they stood, motionless and silent, felt deliberate. Like they were watching. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. Was I imagining this? Sleep deprivation, maybe? I blinked hard, hoping the shapes would vanish, but they didn't. If anything, they became clearer, their subtle movements betraying them as living things. People. I turned and bolted back to the campsite, my heart pounding. I hesitated outside Riley's tent, my mind racing. If this was nothing, she'd never let me live it down. But every instinct screamed that something was wrong, that I unzipped her tent and shook her awake. "Riley, get up," I whispered urgently. She groaned, half asleep. "What's wrong with you?" she mumbled. I told her I'd seen something, people in the woods, and I needed her to look. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, clearly annoyed but sensing my panic. She grabbed her flashlight, and we stepped out of the tent together. I led her to where I'd been, but we didn't make it far. The shapes were closer now. They'd moved silently, their forms more distinct among the trees. There were at least 15 of them, spread out in a semicircle, maybe 50 yards away. I froze, my blood running cold. Riley's flashlight beam swept across the forest, catching glimpses of them, tall, shadowy figures, standing perfectly still. I heard her gasp, her hand gripping my arm. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her flashlight shook in her hand, the beam dancing across the trees. These weren't hikers. Hikers don't stand in the dark, silent and unmoving, watching strangers in the middle of the night. I could see their outlines more clearly now, some tall, some shorter, but all eerily still, their faces hidden in shadow. One shifted slightly, and the motion sent a jolt of terror through me. Riley's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. I'd never seen her like this. She was always the fearless one, the one who laughed off danger. But now her voice cracked as she whispered, "Should we go?" I nodded, unable to speak. We didn't even think about packing up. I grabbed my car keys from my pocket, and Riley snatched her wallet from her tent. We backed away slowly, keeping the figures in sight, then turned and hurried down the trail. The path was narrow and uneven, and we stumbled in the dark, our flashlights barely cutting through the blackness. Every snap of a twig made my heart leap, but nothing followed us, at least not that we could see. The hike back to the car felt endless, but we finally reached the trailhead, jumped into our SUV, and peeled out of the parking lot. Neither of us spoke for the first 20 minutes, the adrenaline still coursing through us. When we finally felt safe enough to stop at a 24-hour gas station, we called the local police. We told them everything, the abandoned gear, the distant campfire, the figures in the woods. The officer on the phone was polite but skeptical, suggesting we'd probably seen some late-night hikers or maybe even animals. He promised to pass it along to the rangers, but his tone made it clear he thought we were spooked city kids imagining things that we didn't push it. Maybe he was right, and we'd let the dark play tricks on us. But deep down, we both knew what we'd seen. Those weren't animals or hikers, and the abandoned gear we'd found, those random, personal items left behind, kept nagging at me. Had others seen those figures and never reported it? Or worse, had they never made it out to tell anyone? We haven't gone camping since. Riley still loves planning trips, but she sticks to crowded state parks now. I don't blame her. Sometimes late at night, I think about that flickering campfire and those silent figures in the trees. I wonder who they were. I wonder what they wanted. And I wonder if they're still out there, watching from the shadows, waiting for the next pair of campers to wander too far into the woods. Two years ago, in the heart of spring, I took a week off from my desk job to go solo camping at a secluded lake nestled deep in the forests of northern Wisconsin. I'd visited the spot once before with a couple of buddies, but this time I craved solitude. Just me in the wilderness, no distractions. The trail to the lake was an easy 2.5-hour hike, a flat path winding through towering pines and budding birch trees. I arrived in the late afternoon, the lake's surface shimmering under a clear April sky. I chose a clearing about 75 yards from the shore, surrounded by dense woods that felt like a natural fortress. I pitched my tent, set up my portable stove, and unfolded my camp chair, popping open a can of ginger ale to soak in the peace. The day was idyllic. Birds chirped overhead, their songs mingling with the soft lapping of the lake. I spent the afternoon exploring the shoreline, collecting smooth pebbles, and letting the stress of deadlines and emails fade away. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I gathered dry branches and kindled a campfire. I've always loved nights in the woods, the way the darkness settles in, heavy and quiet, making the world feel both vast and intimate. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow, and I settled into my chair, content to listen to the symphony of nature. But that night, something felt wrong. As soon as the sun vanished, a creeping unease took hold, like I was being watched. I kept glancing at the trees, their shapes barely discernible in the inky blackness beyond the firelight. I'm not the type to get spooked easily. I've camped alone plenty of times, so I tried to shrug it off. Maybe it was the isolation, or the way the forest seemed to swallow sound. Still, my eyes darted to the shadows, searching for something I couldn't name. The darkness was so thick I doubted I'd see anything even if it was there. I sipped my ginger ale, focusing on the fire's warmth, and told myself to relax. The feeling wouldn't quit, though. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, a sense of eyes boring into me from the dark. I poked at the fire, trying to distract myself by thinking about mundane things, work projects, a fishing trip I wanted to plan, anything to keep my mind occupied. It worked for a while, and I started to ease up, the crackle of the flames lulling me into a calmer state. Hours passed, and I figured it was around 10 p.m. when a sudden, sharp crack shattered the silence. It came from the woods directly ahead, loud and heavy, like a thick branch snapping under serious weight. The sound echoed across the lake, jarring me upright in my chair. My heart pounded. Was it an animal? A bear maybe, or a deer? Or my stomach twisted, something else? I grabbed the canister of pepper spray from my backpack and stood, my voice shaky as I called out. "Hey, is someone there?" The forest answered with silence. Not a rustle of leaves, not a snap of a twig. If it was an animal, I'd hear it moving, brushing against bushes or crunching the forest floor. But the quiet was absolute, and that made it worse. I stood frozen, clutching the pepper spray, waiting for another sound, my eyes straining to pierce the dark. After a tense minute, I remembered the flashlight in my pack. I fumbled through my gear, hands trembling, and pulled it out. I flicked it on and swept the beam across the trees, expecting to see nothing but trunks and underbrush. And at first, that's all there was. I let out a shaky breath, telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe a branch had just fallen. I tossed more wood onto the fire to keep it bright, the light making the clearing feel safer. Every few minutes, I scanned the woods with my flashlight, half braced for glowing eyes or movement. Then, during one of those scans, I saw something. At the far edge of the beam, maybe 50 feet away, was a figure. It was a person, a woman, tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 6 feet or just over. She wasn't unnaturally huge, but she was imposing, probably 200 pounds, her silhouette solid against the trees. The second my light hit her, she stepped back, vanishing into the shadows where the beam couldn't follow. My pulse skyrocketed. Had she been there the whole time, watching me? I thought back to that loud crack. Something heavy enough to snap a branch like that could easily have been her. Panic surged through me. I'd felt watched for hours, and now I knew why. Why was she out there, hiding in the dark? If she was a hiker, why not approach or call out? If she wanted to rob me or worse, why not act sooner? My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Maybe she was checking if I had a weapon, or waiting for me to fall asleep. The thought made my skin crawl. I didn't wait to find out what she wanted that I tore down my tent in a frenzy, shoving it into my pack without folding it. My chair, my stove, my gear. Everything went into the bag in a chaotic mess. I kept my flashlight on, sweeping the trees, but she didn't reappear. I knew the direction she'd gone, so I headed the opposite way, toward the trail, moving as fast as I could without tripping over roots. The path was mercifully clear, but every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made my heart leap. I didn't stop or look back, my breath ragged as I pushed forward. After what felt like forever, I reached my car, fumbling with my keys before jumping in and locking the doors. I peeled out of the trailhead parking lot, my hands shaking on the wheel. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying the night over and over. Why was she out there alone watching me? She was big enough to overpower me if she'd wanted to, so why just stand there? Maybe she was cautious, or maybe she had something worse planned. The thought chilled me. The next morning, I called the local sheriff's office and told them everything. The eerie feeling, the loud snap, the figure in the woods. The deputy was polite, but didn't take it seriously, suggesting it was probably another camper startled by my fire. He said they'd notify the park rangers, but his tone implied he thought I was just spooked by the dark. I didn't push it. Maybe he was right, and my imagination had run wild. But I knew what I'd seen. That wasn't a camper. Campers don't lurk in the shadows, silent and still, watching you for hours. That I still camp. But I stick to busier sites now, places with other people around. The solitude I used to love doesn't feel the same anymore. Every time I'm in the woods, that uneasy feeling creeps back, like someone's out there, just beyond the firelight, waiting. I tell myself it's just nerves, but part of me wonders if she's still out there, hidden in the dark, watching for the next lone camper who wanders too far into the forest. Back in 2014, I lived in a small, forested town in rural Oregon, surrounded by thick woods and dotted with little campgrounds within an hour's drive. I had a rare 4-day weekend from my job at a hardware store, and I hadn't gotten out in ages, so I decided to spend it camping. I picked a quiet spot I'd heard about from a coworker, a tiny campground with just 3 sites, tucked deep in the forest. You parked in a gravel lot and hiked a short trail to the sites, each with a fire ring, some rickety picnic tables, and old grills that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. When I pulled up, the lot was empty, no other cars in sight. I chose the site farthest from the trailhead, figuring it'd feel the most secluded. The walk from my SUV to the campsite was only a few minutes, but the dense pines and cedars made it feel like I was miles from civilization. The campground was a good 50 minutes from town, perfect for unplugging that I set up my tent, unfolded my camp chair, and cracked open a soda. But after about an hour, I realized I hadn't planned much to do. Should I read? Nap? I wondered if there was a trail nearby, so I wandered back to the parking lot to check. No signs or paths, but there was something new. A beat-up old sedan parked next to my SUV. It was a faded blue, covered in rust and scratches, with dents all over like it had been through a war. The weirdest part? No license plates, front or back. I frowned, wondering who'd drive something like that out here. Assuming they were at one of the other sites, I shrugged and headed back to my camp, settling on a stump to sip my drink and listen to the birds. About 15 minutes later, I heard footsteps crunching along the trail behind me. I turned to see a woman walking toward me, no gear or backpack, just staring right at me like she had a purpose. She looked to be in her 40s, but her appearance made her seem older. Her denim jacket was torn and stained, her hair greasy and tangled, and her boots were caked in mud. "Hey, could you help me with something quick?" she asked, her voice rough but polite. I didn't have anything going on, so I nodded and stood. She waved a hand, saying, "Thanks, but not right now. I've got a few things to sort out first. I'll come get you in a bit." I said sure, confused but figuring she needed to unpack or something. She smiled thinly, thanked me again, and walked off toward the other sites. I sat back down, wondering why she'd bothered coming over if she didn't need me yet. Maybe she was just being friendly that I waited, expecting her to return in 10 or 20 minutes. But 30 minutes passed, then an hour. The sun started to dip, painting the sky orange, and I assumed she'd handled whatever it was herself. I forgot about her as I busied myself with camp chores, gathering wood, setting up my stove. By nightfall, I had a fire going and was heating up some soup, the flames casting flickering shadows on the trees. That's when I heard footsteps again, slow and deliberate, coming down the trail. It was pitch black now, the kind of dark where you can't see your hand in front of your face. I turned, squinting, but couldn't make out anything beyond the fire's glow. The crunch of gravel grew closer, and my stomach tightened. Finally, she stepped into the light, the same woman. Her jacket seemed even dirtier in the firelight, and her eyes glinted as she looked at me. "You ready? Just need a quick hand," she said, her tone casual but insistent. I hesitated. With what exactly?" She chuckled, gesturing at my soup. "Doesn't look like you're busy. Won't take long." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and she sidestepped my question, which set off alarms in my head. It was late, and something about her pushiness felt wrong. But I'm not great at saying no, so I mumbled, "Okay," and stood, grabbing my flashlight. She nodded and started walking back down the trail. Expecting me to follow, as we left the fire's glow, the darkness closed in. I flicked on my flashlight, but she didn't have one, which struck me as odd. How was she navigating out here without light? The trail was narrow, lined with thick underbrush, and the silence of the forest felt heavy, oppressive. I tried to make conversation to ease my nerves. "So, what do you need help with?" I asked. She paused for a split second, like she was caught off guard, then kept walking without answering. My pulse quickened. Something was off, my gut was screaming it. The way she moved, the way she avoided my questions, it all felt calculated that I slowed my pace, letting a few feet of distance grow between us, hoping she wouldn't notice. The forest was eerily quiet now, no crickets, no wind, just our footsteps on the gravel. Then she stopped and turned around, Her smile was gone, replaced by a hard, searching look. She saw the gap between us, and her expression shifted, almost angry but controlled. My heart was pounding. Before I could speak, I saw her hand move toward her jacket pocket, and something metallic glinted in the faint light of my flashlight. A knife! I didn't wait to find out that I turned and sprinted into the woods, crashing through branches, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Behind me, I heard her footsteps, heavy, fast, her breath ragged as she gave chase. Thorns snagged at my clothes, but I didn't stop, weaving between trees, my lungs burning. The sounds of pursuit lasted maybe a minute before they faded, like she'd slowed or given up. I kept running, clutching my phone and keys, until I was sure I was alone. Gasping for air, I hid behind a tree and dialed 911, whispering my location to the dispatcher, that by the time the police arrived. The campground was empty except for my SUV. The blue sedan was gone, and so was the woman. I described everything, her appearance, the car, the chase. The officers searched the area but found nothing, no tracks, no sign of her. They took my statement, but I could tell they weren't sure what to make of it. The car's lack of plates and her strange behavior stuck with me, though. I told them how she'd come by earlier, like she was setting me up, making sure I'd trust her enough to follow her later. It felt planned, predatory, that I haven't camped alone since. The way she waited until night, the way she tested me during the day, it's chilling to think about. Was she after my gear? Something worse? I don't know, and I don't want to. What scares me most is wondering if she's still out there, at some other campground, looking for the next person who's alone, who's too polite to say no, who follows her into the dark.